Hi everybody, and welcome to session 5 in the Refuels Week webinar series. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels, and we're coming at you live from the heart of the EU quarter to talk about feedstock availability and sustainability. Now, this is a big topic here in Brussels when people are thinking about renewable fuels, because amid all the talk of new renewable fuels, and we've been talking a lot about that so far in the webinar series, there is concern about whether the feedstock needed for them is available and whether it can be sustainably sourced. Now, the refining industry has developed a Clean Fuels for All pathway based on 2 commissioned studies that assessed the biomass feedstock availability, and it's developed a proposed pathway for biomass-based fuels in line with the result of these studies. Now, in addition, Concawe, the industry's scientific and technical body, commissioned London Imperial College to perform a thorough assessment of EU domestic sustainable biomass feedstock availability to better understand what the current situation is. That study, which we're going to have presented to us today, includes biomass from agriculture and forestry and also waste. So we're going to hear the results of the study and then talk about what this means for various renewable fuels, including the liquid fuels known as e-fuels. We have here with us today representatives from the biomass stream, the waste stream, and the renewable stream, and of course the author of the study by Imperial College London. Now, we'll be talking about fuels beyond just what was covered by the study. We'll be talking about lots of different fuels to get a real full picture, some of which are covered by the study, some of which are not. Now, you at home will be able to ask your questions to the panelists by typing them into the bar you see there next to the screen. I'll be reading them out to the panelists later. So, let me introduce you to the panelists we have with us today. I'll introduce you first to the 3 panelists we have live here in the studio with us in Brussels. First, we have all the way to the right, Emmanuel Desplechin. He is Secretary General of ePure, the European Renewable Ethanol Industry Association. Before joining ePure in 2013, he was Senior Manager for Public Affairs at Novozymes. Then we have Xavier Noyon. He is Secretary General of the European Biodiesel Board, EBB, and he's recently set up the EU office of PEFC International, a global certification for sustainable forest management and traceability. Then we have Angel Alvarez Alberdi. He is Secretary General of IWABA, the Brussels-based trade association promoting the interests of the European waste-based and advanced biodiesel industry. Now, remotely, we have Calliope Panotsu. She is going to present us the results of the study. She's Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London and the Chair of the Biomass Availability and Supply in the European Technology and Innovation Platform for Bioenergy and a member of the Scientific Committee of the Bio-Based Industries Joint Undertaking. And finally, we have Tobias Block. He's Head of Strategy and Content for the eFuels Alliance, a platform with more than 130 member companies for the market ramp-up of hydrogen-derived synthetic fuels. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today, near and far. Let's turn to Calliope next, because I think we're all very, very curious to hear the results of this study. So tell us about the assessment you've conducted of EU domestic sustainable biomass feedstock availability.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. As mentioned, we have collaborated with Concawe the last few months on an overview of sustainable biofeedstock availability in the European Union and the United Kingdom, trying to look at feedstocks that are primarily of lignocellulosic origin and also bio-waste, but basically we tailored the feedstocks to be within the Part A and Part B of the Renewable Energy Directive too. And we try to understand how the feedstocks can offer part of the sustainable resources that are required to meet the strategy for the clean planet for all. I would like to basically just explain to you the aim and the context. The study provides the overview. It covers only domestic feedstocks, and these are of agriculture, forest and waste origin. It also offers a very short overview and the potential for imports and also for algae based on other recent studies from the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. And I have to stress out at this stage that food and feed crops are not included in this study. The study considers up-to-date assumptions that have been agreed with the members of the Concawe and are also in line with the European Green Deal for the sustainable increase of available biomass, understanding, of course, and acknowledging the biophysical restrictions and also the adverse effects of the climate change. I will just briefly also explain the main assumptions on the Concawe scenario, from the Concawe scenarios. We have three scenarios. We have a low mobilization scenario, which assumes that farming and forest practices remain at 2020 levels. We have a medium scenario, which assumes improved mobilization for selected countries with high biomass availability, and we further group these countries into two. Countries that have strong infrastructure, meaning they have good institutional framework, they have established policies and targets for bioenergy and strong innovation profiles. These are Germany, France, Sweden, Finland, Italy, United Kingdom, Austria, and Spain, or countries where there is high biomass availability of so far low cost, Poland, Romania, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Bulgaria. And we have a third scenario, which is the high scenario, where we have enhanced availability and improved mobilization, which is applied to all countries through improved research and innovation, and it's pushing the higher technical sustainable potential. I would just like to illustrate here just a couple of issues. In our scenarios, we include also the cultivation of part of unused, degraded and abandoned land for dedicated lignocellulosic crops, excluding biodiversity-rich land and or land with high carbon stock. The low scenario assumes 25% use of this type of land. The medium scenario assumes 50%, and the high scenario assumes 75%. In terms of forestry, we assume that the stem wood used for energy purposes in the low scenario will be up to 25%, in the medium up to 30%, and in the high up to 50%. And for waste, the availability for the collection and availability percentage for bioenergy is 40 and 35 in 2030 and 2050 for the low scenario. It increases to 50 and 45 in the medium scenario, and also in the high scenario it reaches 60% in 2030 and 55% in 2050. I would just like to go very quickly. The presentation will be available, but I would just like to illustrate. The study itself has taken into account the total sustainable biomass availability for all bio-based markets, including bioenergy, and then subtracting the allocation to the so far known allocation to bio-based products except bioenergy and estimated for each of the types of feedstocks included in the analysis, the potential for bioenergy. So far, the scenarios and the analysis estimate a total of 392 to 533 million tons of oil equivalent per year for by 2030 and 2050. And the bioenergy sector allocation is down to 366 million tons of oil equivalent. And I will quickly speak about the conclusions. There are so far many different publications providing different ranges, and sometimes the assumptions are transparent, sometimes they are not. The issue with Concawe was to have an overview and be very transparent and clear about the assumptions and the results. As I mentioned, these results estimate the overall potential of sustainable biomass for all the bio-based sectors, and then after excluding the so far projected biomass for the bio-based materials, they estimate the amount of 200 to 366 million tons per year from the low to the high scenario for 2030 and 2050. These results indicate again that the competition element, as it is now set within the European Green Deal for power industry, residential and transport, should be explored more in detail. And also, when compared to the European Commission, the Clean Planet for All impact assessment, which allocates approximately 120 to 170 million tons of oil equivalent per year of bioenergy, of the bioenergy to power and industry, it means that still there is a potential of 88 to 196 million tons of oil equivalent per year of biomass for transport in 2050. Of course, to realize this additional potential, our research and development would be required, as well as a concrete implementation of improved management strategies. And even if the potential is there, it's obvious to all actors across the value chain that the supply chains need to be developed and mobilized from the communities and the regions that have and produce these feedstocks. So that was all from my side from the beginning. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Calliope. I mean, I think that's very interesting there, particularly what you say that the potential is there, but it feels like everyone involved in the value chain here agrees that further development is needed. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the panel. Now, you guys at home, if you have questions about the information that you've just been presented, go ahead and type them in now in that question bar. And Calliope is here for the panel, so I'll be able to ask those questions directly to her. You can get it straight from the report's author. So now let's talk about the issue of feedstock availability. Emmanuel, let's start with you. How is feedstock availability affecting renewable ethanol specifically?
Okay, thank you, Dave, for the question. Thank you, Calliope, for the comprehensive study. I think if you allow me, Dave, before I dive into the question of the availability of feedstock for renewable ethanol, one has to answer the question, how is the European Union going to meet its higher targets in terms of decarbonizing transport? And the answer for us is clear. We're going to need more biofuels, not less. All the impact assessment underpinning the climate target plan or the smart and sustainable mobility strategy clearly show that even in the most optimistic scenarios, the car fleet in Europe will still be composed around 86–89% of cars running with internal combustion engines, some sort of liquid fuel. So we ought to put on the market renewables, low carbon fuels. We've done our own study, trying to maximize the potential in terms of demand, so responding to what Calliope has done on the supply side. If you look at a very optimistic scenario, whereby the gasoline market would be made up of 80% E10, so up to 10% of ethanol, and 20% of E20, up to 20% of ethanol. We expect the demand for renewable ethanol to be 8.8 billion liters. That's about 3 billion liters more than what we have today. So the question is, how can we meet that expected demand? Well, spoiler alert, 93% of that demand can already be met with our existing capacities in crop-based ethanol. And the rest is complemented by advanced ethanol facilities, so those that will be running on the feedstocks that Calliope has highlighted, agricultural residues, lignocellulosic material. So the focus on advanced biofuel is great, but make no mistake, we are going to continue to use crop-based biofuels because we believe that this is a sustainable solution available at scale and has one particular advantage, it's low carbon abatement cost. The ethanol that we produce today in Europe has been subject to lots of sustainability controversy, but all these have been debunked one after the other, whether it's food prices or land use. The Commission itself, year after year, in its Renewable Energy Progress Report, has actually validated our sustainability credentials. The crops that are used for European ethanol today, they represent 1.2% of the available arable land in Europe. And we are not apologetic about using land. First, because 99% of the feedstock that we use is coming from Europe. So we provide a service to farmers. We actually provide a market outlet, which is much needed for the farming community. And second, we actually adhere to very strict sustainability criteria that have been defined, refined every 2 years. And today we are very proud to say that, for instance, we can achieve more than 72% greenhouse gas savings compared to our fossil equivalent. So the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, we are going to move towards advanced biofuels, and we will use the biomass that is available. And Calliope shows that there's no competition with other bio applications. There is ample biomass available for us. We are ready to scale up the technology to maximize the potential of advanced biofuels, but this is not going to come at the expense of our existing investment that was called for by policymakers in the first Renewable Energy Directive.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel. Xavier, let's turn to you when it comes to biodiesel. What are some of the feedstock availability issues there?
Thanks a lot also for the question. Here again, I'd like to build up on what Emmanuel has said and also address a point that I was raising with Calliope before the webinar was starting. So in our case, the study that she has presented has very little relevance because she not confessed, but told me that I was right in my understanding that none of the feedstock she was reviewing can be used to produce biodiesel. So in our case, the demand of biodiesel is even, the problematic is even higher, I would say, bigger, because we have a range of potential use that are even larger than the one that Emmanuel mentioned, because we can also be used in sectors that are well known to be harder to electrify or will be harder to electrify, such as heavy duty, aviation, and maritime. So here again, we must confess that for us, the news of the availability of advanced feedstock is a very good news for the whole bioeconomy industry, because we consider ourselves a part of the bioeconomy industry. But it does not solve our problem of availability. So far, we have little problem of availability. Some of are emerging on the waste side that Angel will certainly touch upon. But let's remember that in our case, the figures are a bit different from the one presented by Emmanuel, because we have over 70% of food and feed crop. And again, as well, we are not apologetic. So let's also consider and put into the discussion the fact that there are a lot of positive externalities associated to food feed crop, the co-product generation that Emmanuel did not mention, but I can add up to this, and also in our case the protein independence. In both our case, the protein independence of the EU, and in a period where we know that the Common Agricultural Policy is a center of attention and its reform, also a source of income for our farmers, partly, and we also know that part of those crops are imported, but when they are transformed in Europe, as it is the case in the vast majority of our producers, they also generate added value in the EU. So we don't really have problems of availabilities. We have more a problem of certainty, and the permanent discussion and putting into questions of policy compromises does not help the confidence. And one of my members in one day told me in a conversation I was having with him to try and get feedback from members to build up our policy messages. At the end of the day, he said, I don't really care the feedstocks. Just tell me what feedstocks I can use. And I mean, there are certain sustainability control that are done. There are enough work done on that. At some points, we must call the end of the game and decide that we have done extensive reviews, we are submitting to our control. And there are questions on ILUC, especially in our case, that we acknowledge. Personally, we accept and live with the compromise that has been reached the last time around. I could just, for a brief reminder, tell the audience that the ILUC Delegated Act does not really measure or base ILUC, but more LUC, because there is a general academic understanding that ILUC as such is very hard to measure. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and we are absolutely not in the denial. But if we were to have another time around the debate on ILUC, then let's have it on actualized data. And a lot of the scenarios that were taken into account last time ILUC was discussed as such have evolved, and not in a way that is negative. On the contrary, because the evolution of the biodiesel demand has absolutely not been the one that was predicted at the time. So we would welcome an actualization of the data used for ILUC calculation. And the deforestation policy, yeah, we need anti-deforestation policies, but we need comprehensive one, and not one that only sanction one use of the commodities, but a more global approach.
Thanks a lot, Xavier. Angel, let's turn to you next. What are the feedstock availability issues when it comes to waste to advanced biofuels?
Thanks, Dave, and yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here physically after 1 year of lockdown. So when we speak about waste, I mean, I guess we should just first make clear what we are talking about. And when we talk about the use of waste and residues for the purposes of produced biofuels and bioliquids in the EU, well, this is currently restricted to what we find in Annex 9 of the Renewable Energy Directive, the RED2. And there in Annex 9, you have two parts. One, Part B, where you have used cooking oil and animal fats. And then you have Part A, when you have two broad families. One is lignocellulosic material from agriculture and forestry residues. And you also have waste lipids that essentially are the same as those in Part B of Annex 9. My association, WABA, represents waste lipids scattered in Part A and occupying the entirety of Part B. So legislation dictates that waste in Europe for the production of biofuels is whatever is included in this annex. I mean, as Calliope has found out, when it comes to forestry and agricultural residues in Part A, there is a significant availability of biomass, and I think, well, this is something to be welcome, and this is used to produce advanced bioethanol, represented here by Emmanuel. And then when it comes to waste lipids, which is the part of the industry I represent, the reality is slightly different. So there is certain global availability, but I mean, I would like to make clear one point, which is availability does not equal collectability, and this should not be forgotten. There is a very important point, which is that, I mean, already in the previous RID2, the Commission committed itself to revise Annex 9 on a rolling basis every 2 years. And currently, there is a exercise to revise the Annex by the end of the year. And there is an external consortium composed of several different consultants who are looking at different feedstocks, and they are considering as many as nearly 28. And I think this is a fundamental development for all of us, because if the Commission would decide to eventually include significant number of new feedstock in Annex 9, then you will have more waste and residues to be used for the purposes of production of biofuels and bioliquids. Now, this consortium is looking at issues such as alternative uses, which is a no-go for civil society. I'm talking about alternative uses mostly in other industries, for example, in oleochemicals or food and feed industry. Normally, the existing of alternative uses would be a factor that will lead to the exclusion of these wastes and residues from the annex. And we understand that this rationale makes sense. But beyond competition with other sectors, what needs also to be highlighted is that there is competition within different technologies within the transport sector. And this makes even more sense now when we are about to welcome the adoption of the so-called Fit for 55 package in July, in principle, and you will have a wide array of new targets and new promotion mechanism for different biofuels and bioliquids. In our industry, we are witnessing at the moment with the existing targets, so not even with the revised ones that will be unveiled in proposal manner shortly. Already today, we are feeling fierce competition, and we see market operators having issues to have feedstock to process. Therefore, given this natural limitation of waste and residues out there, I mean, our message is that the EU legislator has to be very careful when deciding on new targets. And certainly, it has to promote those solutions that are the most efficient. And all of this in a scenario in which there is technology neutrality and level playing field between energy transport sectors. That is road, as mentioned today. I mean, the Commission itself accepts that by 2030, the vast majority of vehicles, road vehicles, will be internal combustion engines, and also maritime and aviation. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Angel. Finally, let's turn to Tobias. Now, e-fuels weren't directly touched upon in the study, but speaking more generally, Tobias, what is the situation when it comes to availability of renewable energy or CO2 for the production of e-fuels?
Yes, thanks, Dave, and a warm welcome from my home office here. The advantage of e-fuels is that we don't depend on biomass. So we are not in a possible competition to food production. But the disadvantage is that we need a lot of renewable energy due to the losses during the conversion of energy. We need much more renewable electricity than the direct use of renewable electricity, for example, in electric cars. So e-fuels only make sense if a lot of renewable energy is available. And luckily, more than 15,000 times of energy arrives every second on our planet that then is used by the global energy demand. And we just have to go to regions in which the conditions for renewable energies are much better, and therefore the production costs of renewable electricity is much cheaper as well. For example, a windmill in the southern parts of Chile is producing 4 times more energy than a windmill in Germany. It is generating electricity on 270 days a year, and the same windmill in Germany would only operates with full load on 66 days a year. And this better capacity factor of renewable energy plant in certain areas is compensating the efficiency losses during the production, transport and use of e-fuels. So the availability of renewable energy is important for the production of hydrogen and e-fuels. And then another advantage of e-fuels is that we can use an existing infrastructure. So we can use existing vessels to transport e-fuels from South America, from Australia, from North Africa, to the regions where we need those energy. And we have existing pipelines, we have gas filling stations, so everything which is there can be used. And as mentioned by other speakers, we can also address the existing fleet stocks of roughly about 1.4 billion vehicles worldwide, which have an internal combustion engine. A second source that is needed for the production of synthetic fuels is a carbon source. We think that until 2035, and a lot of studies are showing this, enough unavailable point sources are available. So for example, in the cement industry and the glass industry, there is still a lot of CO2 in the flue gas, which can be used because we don't have the chance to avoid those CO2 emissions yet. But afterwards, we have to develop the so-called carbon capture from ambient air. Luckily, we can use a lot of energy from the exothermic process and the synthesis to use the capturing of CO2 from the ambient air. So we depend not on biomass, but on those two ingredients, a lot of renewable electricity and CO2.
Thanks a lot, Tobias. So I want to get the panel's reaction. I mentioned at the beginning this Clean Fuels for All strategy, or pathway rather, that the refining industry has come out with. So I wanted to get your reaction to that because it's looking at some of these feedstock issues. Emmanuel, what is your main reaction to that pathway that's been developed?
Well, I think it's great. The first, because it's the first time, but it's the first time for everything and for us as well. There is a clear commitment from the refiners and associated suppliers, a clear commitment to climate neutrality. More important, there is also a clear pathways that shows the importance of renewable and low carbon fuels to get there. And so the clear pathway is something that the Commission has failed to put on the table. So I like the idea that at least the industry is not just committing to carbon neutrality, but it is also showing a way to get there, and it comes with an associated roadmap for investment. The second part that I like is, well, the policy recommendations that come with that. And I think with this, I would take 3 of them. First, the recognition that we need, well, the policy asks that we need to take into consideration the carbon footprint of the fuel when it comes to CO2 standards, in particular its renewable content, because it's, we have a situation in the EU where we have a dogmatic, nonsensical approach to only look at tailpipe emissions, which misleadingly labels electric vehicles as zero-emission cars. The second element is the realization that we need to move away from taxation on volume, but to look at energy/CO2 content of the energy products. And then, I mean, I think there's clear direction for what kind of fuels we want. Now, where maybe I have some reserve is the fact that FuelsEurope/Concawe is a bit timid in looking at the potential of crop-based biofuels. Again, I understand that there is no willingness, maybe from Calliope or from FuelsEurope, to waste any political credit or capital in defending crop-based biofuels, but I find the pathway a bit timid. And acknowledging stability or even a decline in the role of crop-based biofuels, where I think it's just a reaction to an unfavorable political climate. But once the sustainability concerns over crop-based biofuels have been debunked, there's no reason not to unleash their potential.
Calliope, maybe I could get you to respond to that. Is the refining industry being too timid when it comes to crop-based biofuels?
I can only speak from my interactions for the study. The focus of the study was to deal with Annex 9 Part A and B. So I don't think they are very timid during the discussions, and also our recommendations as part of the research is that we really support what Emmanuel said. Crop-based biofuels can be sustainable and can offer resilience in socially and economically in regions and rural communities. So I think it was just that the focus of this study had to respond to the availability of what the regulator has put in front of the refineries so far. But beyond that, fully agree, at least personally, because I can only represent my opinion on what Emmanuel has said and the previous speakers. The European Union and the United Kingdom have extensive farming community. Crop-based biofuels, whether they are current crops or whether they are lignocellulosic, and especially if we move to cropping practices which are sustainable, like sequential and cover crops, are extremely beneficial to foster the economic and social resilience, and also to help with climate change effects. For example, the desertification that's happening in front of us rapidly in the south part of the European Union.
Well, speaking of the regulator, Xavier, I'm wondering if you agree with Emmanuel's statement that the Commission hasn't developed a clear pathway for clean fuels. Do you agree with that?
As a principle, I always agree with him. No, I mean, it's true that we have complementary messages. What I'd like to add up to, I agree with this, and I agree with the timidity that I could not. I understand the position Fuels Europe is in, but on the other hand, I know also, and I acknowledge that in the Clean Fuels for All, there is a clear message on crop-based biofuel. And I don't want to be speaking like we do only crop-based. As I said, in our case, it's more in the vicinity of 70%. And I'll let Angel also go into more details for that, but just for the record, there are also different pathways within the industry, and both of them are very, very important. It's just that the impression that I have is that each time we are trying to limit the number of feedstock, whether artificially or have a debate that even in itself, by their only existence, contribute to weaken the confidence of the industry. They have no clear pathways, and they don't know where to go. And this reflection on a feedstock that I made before, I think for the industry, we must understand that, I mean, it's a common sense to know that, to acknowledge that transport is probably the only sector where decarbonization is not really on the right track. And we are losing a lot of times in sterile debates, For some of them, we already need the issue because somebody from working in the consulting in our industry, especially in the context of the Netherlands, always use the expression of unavoidability of our contribution. And it's not a nice word because I don't want to be only unavoidable. I want to be sustainable and I want to make a real contribution. And sincerely, a real contribution for me, it's not only a small blending here and there. There are sectors and application as a heavy duty where we can do 100% biodiesel and using all feedstock. So at some points, we really need the Commission to get its act together, and we understand they have political arbitration to make, not all of them on rational facts, but still the debate must stop, and it must stop for a period of time that is long enough that we must think of the investment capacities that are there, and debates around waste that took place recently. Each time it hurts because at some points we don't know if the industry will still believe in itself enough so that they will address the demand that needs to be growing. And we also know for a fact, even from the most greater believers of the electrification, that it will not happen overnight. And in the meantime, do we lose all this possible substitution of fossil fuel with clear GHG benefits? It's a bit surprising.
And for sure, it's a politically sensitive issue. Angel, from the perspective of waste to advanced biofuels, what's been your reaction to the Clean Fuels for All pathway?
Yeah, well, I really welcome the vision of Fuels Europe to come up with this initiative. I mean, fuel suppliers are obligated parties, so I mean, they are the ones that need to incorporate different biofuels and bioliquids into their fuel mix. And I mean, as a whole, as an industry and individual companies, I mean, they've shown their commitment to achieve net zero emissions in 2050, and here comes a very big cliche of our industry that there is no silver bullet. So basically, we need to ensure that legislation promotes a wide array of solutions, a wide array of feedstocks, and a wide array of technologies precisely to pave the way to achieve net zero emissions in 2050. And in this context, I mean, what is clear is that any sustainable feedstock should be a valid feedstock for the purpose of production of biofuels. I mean, it's such an obvious point to make, but yet it still has to be made here today. I mean, as an industry, we see that the Commission has been also traditionally timid when it comes to the promotion of biofuels and bioliquid. I mean, they clearly shown a preference for electromobility, and I mean, we have absolutely no issue about that. Certainly, electromobility is the future, but until we get there, there is a major role to play for biofuels, bioliquid e-fuels. We are about to change the legislation yet again. So, I mean, we are on the verge of a major opportunity to come up with a solid system, and the Commission has to embrace that. I mean, it is a fantastic opportunity for the Commission to seriously think about issuing a strategy for renewable and low carbon liquid fuels, the same as they have done with hydrogen. And I mean, I really expect that this visionary work from Fuels Europe, gathering the biofuels and bioliquids industry at large, will result in this outcome.
Emmanuel, you wanted to? No. Yes.
Yeah, no, I just wanted, I mean, because it's a bit difficult to be looking at the Fuels Europe pathway without having them, giving them the opportunity to respond to some of the criticism that we are mentioning. So if I can be their advocate for a minute, I would also say, to be fair, that the pathway that they have put forward is also one that is within the rules of the game that we have today. So I do understand why they would not also propose further increase of crop-based biofuels, but I've seen also some opening in corresponding position paper as well, that they are looking at, well, they would be ready to consider changing these rules in a few years' time. And I think it is the role of Xavier and myself to bend the rules on crop-based biofuel first. And from there, I was not going to bring ILUC on the table, but you did. I welcome the fact that EBB is now ready to talk about ILUC. The EU has done its homework when it comes to ILUC. A few years ago, we just went for a blanket approach to cap the crop-based biofuels because we had little idea of how to tackle this problem. But since RED II was enacted, we've actually decided to look at it more seriously, and there is a delegated act that now singles out those biofuels that have a high risk of ILUC. But that's just it's one part of the equation. The second part of the equation is to say, now that you have separated the good from the bad, you have to unleash the potential of the good biofuels. And this is where I fail to understand the rationale, apart from not wanting to waste any political credit on this thorny issue. I fail to understand the rationale of the European Commission that has finally done the homework and identified that palm and peatland drainage were the problematic child, but now unleash the potential of those that you have recognized have a very low risk of indirect land use change and provide high greenhouse gas emission savings. So that's, and I'm pretty sure that once Xavier and I have done our homework to re-educate policymakers as they need, then FuelsEurope will also join us in embracing all sustainable forms of bioenergy, including crop-based biofuel.
Tobias, let me get your take on this from the perspective of e-fuels. What's been your reaction to the Clean Fuels for All pathway?
Yes, I would say it is a good start to come up with something like this, but it's not ambitious at all. But this is because of the regulative situation, which has been mentioned by Emmanuel and Angel as well. The current renewable energy directive target in the transport sector of 14% is reachable without any investments in renewable fuels due to the multiplier on charging power for electric vehicles and the quadruple counting. And so I fully understand the fuel industry, why it is not investing right now. But that means that we need to change this regulation. The Renewable Energy Directive has to be much more ambitious. Our position here is that we need at least 24% of renewable energy in 2030 without any multipliers. And if you have seen the leak of the Renewable Energy Directive a few weeks ago, there's a sub-target for hydrogen and e-fuels of 4% included, which would be 12 times more of the amount of fuels Europe seeing in 2030. So I think it's a good start, but much more is possible here.
So Calliope, switching topics, I wanted to ask you, I mean, perhaps it's simplifying a little bit, but according to your research, which feedstocks specifically face the biggest concerns about availability? Is it crops? Is it forestry? Is it waste? Where are the biggest areas of concerns coming from?
I think at the moment it is on forestry. It's mostly how to sustainably manage the forests so that they are what they are anyway, by nature, multifunctional. And how to integrate the activities of fuel, energy, and bio-based materials, but also landscaping and keeping nature close to people. I think this is the most important. And of course, outside the scope of the study, as we mentioned, the crop-based biofuels have faced so far the highest criticism, and as mentioned by colleagues, now we are a few steps ahead, and I think a more clear look must be given to the crop-based feedstocks as well. So that there are opportunities that are low ILUC as well, and these crop-based biofuels can also have a level playing field within the portfolio of feedstocks.
Well, we've got tons of questions coming in from the audience. I'm going to go to those in a few minutes, but first I want to talk about sustainability criteria and how we could envision those being developed. Maybe first, Xavier, I saw you raise your hand. Did you want to respond to this?
Not to Calliope, I just wanted to complement what Emmanuel was saying on ILUC, because it's not like we never wanted to talk about ILUC, but just as I reminded before, at the end of the day, the Delegated Act does not work on ILUC, but on deforestation. That is something that is measurable, and that was what was chosen. But we all suffer from an ILUC factor that has been miscalculated and should be actualized. Also, the feedstock that you use. So we would all gain from a calculation of ILUC, GHG effect and performance that would be better, and we know that it should be the case if to be in the discussion, because today there is no real taking into account, but it's an argument that is constantly used to reduce our GHG performance it's not there, but it's there. So if I explain myself technically, you're probably aware the GHG values and calculation in the red does not include ILUC, but it's out there, and certain reports it's mentioned, and for example, the Progress and the Renewable Energy Progress report mentioned our contribution according to red, and if ILUC was taken into account. So we have no principle against that, on the contrary, but then on a real serious academic way, and we will all benefit from that. So that's for the discussion, and Calliope is certainly much more an agronomist than me, but there is really a way to take that into account that makes a lot of difference, and it is a different thing to deny any ILUC effect or anything, or just to say, yeah, but it's a very, very, very complex calculation, so let's be very serious about that. So that's just the point. Then your question was, sorry?
Well, maybe we can come to that in a second, because Angel, I think you wanted to respond as well.
Well, on sustainability, I mean, it's just my personal reflection. After 15 years of successive waves of legislation on biofuels and bioliquids, and I would say the virtuous pressure from civil society organizations, I mean, we represent collectively an industry which is incredibly sustainable, actually. I mean, if we talk about defossilization, I mean, we are bringing defossilization, and legislation has been revised every now and then, pretty regularly, and each time the standards for sustainability are tightened. So right now, we are representing a highly sustainable industry, and the legislation is about to change again. So it's safe to say in a few years, sustainability will even be strengthened. And not only that, the Commission is about to unveil in 2 weeks' time a much-awaited implementing act on revised standards for certification schemes. Well, basically, this means that the system that is currently used to accredit sustainability of biofuels is going to be revamped in a strict manner. So basically, there are several tweaks and adjustments to be made in the value chain. So in 2 months' time, we are going to have even stricter sustainability. And beyond that, the Commission is working on a pan-EU track and trace database for all biofuels and bioliquids. Work is well advanced. There are solid technical specifications and a clear timeline for its entry into force. And I mean, this will represent a revolutionary change when it comes to traceability and transparency in the global value chain of biofuels and bioliquids, because in this database, you will have to have all sustainability information So again, I was saying we are on the verge of a major regulatory change, but we are also on the verge of a revolutionary change in terms of sustainability, which actually is very good because, I mean, the Commission is coming up with, or we expect they are coming up with revised targets, more ambitious targets, so it only makes sense that sustainability increases. But I mean, let's be clear, and we've been talking today about not being apologetic. Well, I will make my not being apologetic pledge. I mean, we should really state proudly that we represent one of the most sustainable industries in the world, collectively.
Of course, campaigners would say that the law kept getting tightened because the sustainability criteria weren't robust enough to start with. And on that subject, I would ask Xavier and Emmanuel, in terms of ILUC being included in the sustainability criteria, what is your vision for that? Should it be done, and how should it be done? Emmanuel, you want to go that first?
Maybe to start with, I think it's very good that both Angel and Xavier have actually restated the obvious, that we are today operating under the most stringent sustainability schemes that exist, and that is something we welcome. And it's not just a tick of the box exercise. It's not just that we have to comply with 3 criteria and that's it. We actually do even better. Because, as I was mentioning at the very beginning of my intervention, I mean, the minimum greenhouse gas emission savings is 50% now. In our industry, we're already above 72. And by that, we also provide, when we produce our ethanol under the sustainability criteria that are the ones in the red, that also means that all our co-products are also produced with these sustainability criteria being applied. Now, we are all in for sustainability. I think we can't fool ourselves. If we are asking for political support, it is absolutely normal that we abide by strict and stringent sustainability criteria. In our case, we welcome those that are in the red, but because we source all our feedstock in Europe, we also have to comply with the agricultural policies in Europe, something that other jurisdictions don't have to do so. We would actually welcome a strengthening so that there is a level playing field. We have to abide by a non-GM policy. We also have to abide by waste management practices, traceability requirement that Angel was mentioning, and we would very much welcome that this is also somehow exported to other jurisdictions. Now on ILUC, I think, I mean, it's Groundhog Day when we go on ILUC. I mean, we've tried the route of the ILUC factors. It didn't work because there were uncertainty. And then we went for a blanket approach of capping all crop-based biofuels. Now, because we didn't know what to do, we lowered the cap, and then we tackled it through a delegated act. Again, it's history repeating itself, but we have to learn from our experience. And the fact is, study after study, whether it's modeling, whether it's actual observation, the problematic child was palm that was associated with peatland drainage. We have tackled this issue from 2023 onwards. There is a gradual phase out of those biofuels made from high ILUC feedstock, and some member states have actually anticipated that and have already started banning palm oil. And we were one of those industries saying, you have to get rid of palm oil because this is the anchor into the sustainability debate. So we've done that despite the threat of WTO challenges that has now materialized. So we have no issue in retackling ILUC. I think I will join Xavier by saying it's ironic that we have taken this blanket approach of capping all crop-based biofuels, and yet we still have these figures in the Annex 8 of the red that are on the basis of models for 2020 based on the national action plans by the 28, at the time, member states, action plans that were obsolete the day after they were published. I mean, look at ethanol. They were expecting 14 billion liters of ethanol by 2020. We are at 6 billion liters, and yet the models were calculated with this shock in demand. So we have to yeah, I mean, if you want to look at ILUC again, and we are very happy to do that, we don't have any political capital to waste on it. We much welcome this debate. We have just to be serious about it and show and realize that if we demonstrate yet again that European ethanol and other European feedstocks for biodiesel do not have a high risk of ILUC, then their potential should be unleashed.
Xavier, would you be happy to look at ILUC again?
Yes, but I mean, we have an academic in our webinar, but the reason it's not done, it's not because of lobbying or anything. It's just that a serious academic would not use those models as they are. So they are something to be monitored, to be used, but at the end of the day, the compromise was to look at actual deforestation in square meters, because that's something that you can measure, and deforestation is not addressed by if you address biofuels. If there was a relation to it, and no, but in general, what is serious about deforestation is what the EU is doing with the action plan and the possible due diligence. That's something, but so not strictly with us, and it's an interesting calculation, but it remains something that is an academic model, and that's why it was not used, but still it's around, it's still there and used as a reporting, a contextual element. Then it should be done in a much better way. But integrating it in the sustainability criteria does not make sense. Otherwise, it would have been done. Even the strongest proponents on that feel uncomfortable doing that. And as I said, it's not the same thing as deforestation. It's a more subtle thing. Deforestation in itself must be addressed frontally, directly, but it's not only our issue, it's an issue of commodities, and that's the way it should be handled. And we are one commodity, so it will be handled this way. In addition, we have also feedstock that have absolutely zero ILUC effect, the waste, a significant part of it. And yeah, that's for the sustainability, I think it doesn't make sense to integrate it. It doesn't mean that it does not make sense to discuss about it in a serious academic manner.
So let's go to the questions that have come in from the audience. I have a couple technical questions for Calliope first on the presentation. So Calliope, first question for you. This is from Evgeny Shaligin. What sources have been used for evaluation of biomass potentials, e.g. chlorine, land cover, or any others?
Yes, we have used chlorine, but we have also used Eurostat, so we are basing them in statistics, and then we have allocation factors and also crop to residue or raw material to residue feedstock ratios, and we also base our assumptions to models, agricultural models like Capri that are being used by the European Commission when they do formulate their projections for the policy. So it's a combination of the most recent agricultural / forestry / waste statistics. And also we have performed a set of tailored interviews with colleagues that have already participated or done themselves similar assessments to make sure we got our assumptions within the range of the assumptions that other colleagues are also considering, and that we have not misused or misinterpreted other studies.
Okay, another question for you, Calliope, from Anders Roj. What would a realistic average conversion factor be between the 88 to 196 megaton /Y, or yeah, M
per
ton
year,
/Y?
I guess.
Yep. Raw material and final fuels usable by internal combustion engines?
I'm afraid I have to do the calculations. All I can say to Anders is that we are already working on allocating, it's the second part of the study, on allocating this raw material to different pathways and carriers. So this will be published online from Concawe as a complete study, I understand, towards the end of this summer. So we are The part I presented deals with the feedstock, but we have performed a very detailed analysis of how this feedstock can be used by different carriers, and this will be published as a complete study.
Okay, we have a next question here for Tobias. So this questioner asks, when it comes to availability, you depend on renewable electricity availability. FuelsEurope Clean Fuels for All shows 1 MTO production of e-fuels in 2030. How do you see the production level in 2030? From your introduction, you seem to give an important role for imports.
Yes, that's right. Due to the dependency on cheap renewable electricity, most of the hydrogen and synthetic fuels will be produced in areas where the production of renewable energy is quite cheap. So we still will need imports. In Germany, for example, we have 70% of our primary energy is imported, and we don't have the potential to build up so many renewable plants to be self-sufficient in Germany, for example. That's why imports are needed, and imports are good because from an economic perspective, it is much cheaper to reduce CO2 with those kind of energy carriers than producing renewable electricity with bad conditions. As mentioned, I think the 1 megaton oil equivalent that FuelsEurope are forecasting for 2030 are not enough. In our perspective, we need at least 15 megatons of oil equivalent to fulfill the Green Deal targets and to ramp up a synthetic fuel production worldwide. And we are quite happy to see that a lot of large projects currently get announced. So a few weeks ago, a 25 gigawatt electrolysis project has been announced in Oman. Last week, we have heard of a 150 gigawatt project in Australia. Of course, these are just announcements, and we need now to work on the right political framework to realize those projects. And that's why the European Green Deal is so important for us. We are keen to see what the Commission will publish on the 14th of July. I already have mentioned our positions for the Renewable Energy Directive. I think another regulation is quite important as well. It's the CO2 standards for new vehicles. Unfortunately, we have the fact that electric cars have always 0 gram per kilometer because we have a tailpipe measurement independent of where the electricity comes from. And the internal combustion engine has always the fossil tailpipe value. So even if you supply a vehicle with an internal combustion engine with 100% renewable fuels, it still gets the fossil tailpipe value. So for the automotive industry, it is impossible to achieve the regulative objectives with the current kind of tank-to-wheel regulation. That's why we advocate for a crediting system of renewable fuels and the CO2 standards. This would be another quite attractive target market for the renewable fuel industry next to the red, and it would allow to have a long-term market perspective for cars with an internal combustion engine, which would initiate investments in renewable fuels. Because why should anyone invest in renewable fuels if in 10 or 15 years the vehicles will disappear? And that's why it is important to stay technology open, to stay technology neutral, and to allow a fair competition between different climate neutral powertrain systems.
So the next question is for Angel. So the questioner asks, you underlined the difference between collectibility and availability. What's the current situation with the share of collected waste used for fuels? What is needed to increase the collectibility?
Very good question. Unfortunately, collectibility is kind of, in some cases, it cannot be increased. I mean, a few years ago, we commissioned a study focusing on the most widely available waste lipid in Europe, used cooking oil, and we found out that the volumes coming from the professional sector, that is the HoReCa, restaurants, etc., and also the food industry, had reached maturity in Europe and in most developed economies. So the vast majority of the untapped resources comes from household collection. Now, this is where I say availability doesn't equal collectability, because it is complicated from different standpoints. I mean, first one is just pedagogy, how you get people to actually incorporate to the lifestyle kind of best practices for collecting. And then one step beyond, basically you need the logistics to actually try to, to ensure that what individuals collect actually then enters the value chain and gets eventually processed. Beyond this, I think there is a very interesting underlying debate when it comes to collectability and availability, because when we talk about wastes and residues, I mean, only global figures make sense, because, I mean, we are, I mean, these feedstocks are being commoditized, and there is, very active international trade, and our industry does rely on imports. It was mentioned here today, and this comes with question marks. So imports are good. Limitation of imports will have WTO consequences, but I mean, being honest, imports have also raising questions again by NGOs. Because in whatever is a waste in Europe may not be a waste in other countries. And then when we are talking about decarbonizing and achieving net zero emissions by 2050, so Europe is a trendsetter. We are doing the right things, but other countries, third countries outside of the EU, will have to decarbonize their own transport systems themselves. So use the same feedstocks that are currently being imported. So when it comes to the global availability of the waste, my association represents waste lipids, one gets concerned when it sees the proliferation of different targets for different transport sectors, when we are aware of the fact that other economies have significant capacity installed at the moment to process these waste lipids. So again, the waste lipids that we are using today, they are mostly imported, but we see humongous plants being built in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in the US, in China. And I wonder whether these imports will be here in 10 years' time. And this is problematic, because even now, with the current legislation, as I said in the preliminary remarks, some of our members are witnessing extreme competition in the market. They are having issues sourcing sustainable feedstock to produce waste-based biodiesel. The EU legislator has to be extremely careful of how they craft legislation starting in a month's time, because the unintended consequences may be extremely negative, not only for the industry, but also for the EU own climate mitigation policies, and eventually for what they call sector integration, that is how different legislative instruments interact. I'm speaking in particular RED2, FQD, and the aviation and maritime instruments, RefuelEU and FuelEU.
So this next question, I think, up to Emmanuel. It's from Ketstutis Starkus. Could the panel elaborate on the issue of fuel quality standards and currently effective blend walls? What is the current progress of reviewing these to accommodate higher share of biofuels? Are the ICE manufacturers on board with the need to further invest in ICE technologies to ensure compatibility with higher bioblends rather than a focus on EVs?
Excellent, very valid question. I'm sure everybody here will have a view. If I start, I would say that, I mean, where we are today is nowhere close as where we envisaged we would be by 2020. and that's because of policy uncertainty and constant revisions. I'm pretty sure we'll come back to that. So when it comes to the petrol market, on average, there is the 5.5% of ethanol in volume being blended at European level. The blend world today is at 10%, so we still have room to grow, both crop-based and also complement with advanced biofuel for it. Now, to the question that is being raised, there is today absolutely no incentive for a car manufacturer to invest in typically a downsized petrol engine that would save much more emissions, because the fuel that is powering the vehicle is simply ignored, and that's what Tobias was saying before. What we want is a regulation, CO2 standards that would unlock the potential of the different biocomponents. In our case, 10% of ethanol is today the limit. But also we want that the car manufacturer is incentivized to go beyond that. So not only we need this regulatory change as per the limits, but also the contribution of the renewable fuels need to be accounted for, because it's absolutely insane from our perspective that whether you are running on pure petrol or a blend of up to 20% of renewable ethanol, you're only measuring the tailpipe emissions and not accounting for the carbon sequestration that took place before. And I think Tobias will join me in this. So it's the entire package that has to be accommodated and not just looked in isolation, one legislation versus another.
Xavier?
Yes, in our case, we know that the Commission, so we understand that part of the FQD is probably linked to the revision of RED II, and there is an understanding that the two things are closely linked. FQD also introduced the GHG notion and the incentives to that, so that's also an important part with the renewable energy content in the Renewable Energy Directive. There are several sub-questions in one question, and I just want to dwell a little bit on the car manufacturer's issue. So the question of the technical compatibility is one that has a different cultural approach, although it's a technical issue. And in France, all manufacturers have already committed in terms of ethanol and butane and biodiesel to how you say, homologate their car for higher blends of biodiesel and bioethanol. So, yeah, how much you need to maintain or what it changes, but it is not a huge retrofit. It has nothing, for example, comparable to what you would need to do to retrofit an older vehicle for a new particle emission. It's mainly a question of maintenance, so it's not such a big thing. There are different interpretations, and certain OEMs would contradict me on certain things, but there are different variations, and de facto, a lot of cars run with a higher blend. In our case, we have also a certain specificity because we do produce two types of biodiesel. One is a drop-in, and the other one is not a drop-in, so it cannot replace exactly, and those compatibility issues raised by certain car manufacturers raise. But for example, for FAME, which is the one that is impacted by the blend wall, we have also applications such as the heavy duty, where it's already very common to use B100 and with a minimal technical maintenance difference. And so it is really on the table. It is certainly a very good solution. We know that the Commission considers it, and we think it's the way forward. Yeah, because it's really the way. If we look at the projected reduction of the amount of a individual internal combustion engine, then we must seize the occasion to further decarbonize the fuel that we put in the remaining vehicle with a fleet that will last for long, and in certain specialized application even more. And yeah, there should be the incentive for it, and we think the Commission is seriously considering that.
So the next question is for Tobias. The question is, there are different sectors in transport, but you seem to favor road transport as the lead market. Why is road transport so important?
Thanks, Dave. There's no question that e-fuels need to be used in aviation and maritime, and also in the chemical industry, and also for long-term energy storage. But we have to look at the willingness of pay in different target markets, because if you want to scale up a new technology, you need to find someone who can pay the price in the beginning. And in the road sector, we have much higher CO2 abatement costs. If you take the penalties, for example, from the automotive industry and recalculate it to the willingness of pay, they can pay up to 1.6 euro per liter. And this is a quite attractive target market. In the last year, for example, the Volkswagen Group had to pay up to 100 million euros of fees. Jaguar Land Rover had to pay something as well. Fiat Chrysler has pooled with Tesla and paid them 1.8 billion euro to pool together their vehicles. If those penalties could be directed into investments of renewable fuels, it could be a quite attractive target market. With this, we could scale up the synthetic fuel production. But for this, we need a crediting system of renewable fuels and the CO2 standards. In addition, for example, take the energy taxation. If the energy taxation is changed and consider the carbon footprint of the energy carriers, you have an indirect CO2 price of, in average, 210 euro per ton. So it's much more effective to change the energy taxation than just including the transport sector in the ETS, which will start with a quite low CO2 price in the beginning. Only with the road sector, we have a market in which we can scale up those necessary technologies without any public money, without subsidies. The aviation and energy intensive industry is regulated in the European trading system with current CO2 prices of up to 50 euro per avoided ton of CO2. So it's 10 to 15 times lower than CO2 abatement costs in the road sector. And that's why we believe the road sector can deal as a locomotion. It can be, even if in the end everything is electrified, it would be stupid right now to ignore that target market.
Angel, what about you? Are you guys also prioritizing road transports?
Good question. So basically, with waste lipids being processed by a FAME biodiesel plant, you can have a biodiesel that can be used for both the road and maritime sector. It cannot be used in planes because of its cold flow properties. So the vast majority of the members, 35 companies having 50 production plants in Europe, are producing a waste-based biodiesel to be used for the road transport sector. But we see increasingly that our members are also producing waste-based biodiesel to be used in ships for the maritime sector. And in this conundrum between different uses of the same feedstock, actually, I think it's a very relevant topic in today's conversation, because again, if we take waste lipids as a feedstock that is limited by nature, we really think that the promotion coming from the EU legislator has to ensure that you use these feedstocks in the most efficient manner. And we understand that waste-based biodiesel has the highest greenhouse gas savings, and it's not us who say this, it's Annex 5 of the RED2, so we are above 90%. So these are the ones that should eventually be promoted. So basically the road and maritime uses should prevail when compared to other uses. Or at least we should ensure that there is a level playing field between technologies and that no technology gets undue promotion over the others. Otherwise, we are gonna will go to a scenario in which the Commission, the EU, will be picking winners and losers, in which the winners get a ring-fenced market, and the losers basically cease to exist in a short amount of time after 2025, when the new legal instruments will come into force. And again, road and maritime, I mean, when it comes to internal combustion engines using diesel, waste-based biodiesel is the key decarbonization agent for these vehicles, cars, vans, heavy-duty vehicles. So the EU legislator should ensure that in this period, 25 to 2030 and beyond, waste-based biodiesel is in sufficient volumes in the market. So no unintended consequences from policies. Thanks.
Xavier, are you prioritizing land transport?
The question should not be really asked in this way. For us, we have seen that the debate preceding the discussion on both maritime and aviation have also given rise to stakeholder statements. So it's not only the NGO, and indirectly also supported by the Commission on the idea that there would be a kind of, independently from RED II, independently from any political discussion in co-decision, a kind of sub-list of what constitutes sustainable feedstock. And that's the only thing I didn't like so much in the presentation of Calliope, but just the wording of sustainable feedstock, limiting to them. We've got a complete list of sustainable feedstock, that are the one from RED II. And I don't say it would solve everything and some of the issues that Angel pointed out, but at least it would not increase them and make them harder. So I think there is no legitimacy for the Commission to restrict the list of feedstocks for certain use, and no legitimacy for certain stakeholders to use this debate. In my opinion, I'm going to be a bit judgmental in certain cases for the aviation and maritime. The fact to restrict the limit of feedstocks makes the possibility to integrate a significant amount of biofuel longer in time, more, and we have already a need for the road transport, which is something that does not really reach its objectives that are very big. So we must have additional quantities and not replace one by the other.
Emmanuel, do you have the same perspective on this transport mode issue?
No, we see this tendency to allocate biofuels to aviation and maritime as setting a dangerous precedent. In our case, ethanol has at the moment very limited perspective for aviation, alcohol to jet in particular. So if the Commission's plan were to materialize, whereby biofuels should only be for those sectors that cannot be electrified, then we would actually be depriving the road transport from ethanol, whereas it actually has the potential to lower the emissions. I mean, typically we are looking at cars that will become more and more electrified, but that will also include plug-in hybrids, so partly running on internal combustion engines. So we ought to also power this car with the better petrol that exists, and the better petrol that exists is high octane, renewable, low carbon fuel such as ethanol. So we can have, we should also have a role in road transport while we build and continue research and innovation in potential uses in aviation.
Okay, let's take a last question to Calliope. This question comes from Evgeny Shalajan. So by low, medium, and high, you have mentioned mobilization scenarios, right? What about sustainability scenarios? What if the mobilization will be rising, but the legal limitations for biomass usage will be more and more restricted by EU countries in order to protect nature, for instance, for more protected forests, etc.?
Thank you. Just a clarification, thank you. It's a very important question. All the scenarios have the sustainability criteria that at the moment are within the Renewable Energy Directive number 2. Plus, they are not considering biodiversity sensitive areas. Due to the framework of the study, we couldn't dive into what would happen in individual member states. So this is the sustainability framework that we have operated. All the three scenarios are based within the Renewable Energy Directive plus biodiversity.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more question, actually. So this question is for Angel. What about municipal waste and non-recycled plastic as feedstock? Does that work?
Yes, certainly. Well, I mean, disclaimer, in principle, I mean, the amount of municipal solid waste that my members process is limited, but in general terms, or in the great scheme of things, yes, certainly these two feedstocks offer a great potential. The thing, municipal solid waste, well, I mean, the name is extremely broad. You have different stuff in there that can be processed using different technologies. Plastic is mostly plastic pyrolysis, but I mean both technologies have a potential for the production of waste-based biodiesel. And again, in both cases, especially in the case of municipal solid waste, you have less issues on competing uses that may lead to some sustainability implications. So I think they are going to play a role in the broader fuel mix. Again, there is no silver bullet, so you know all different feedstock and all different processing technologies are needed to achieve or to pave the way to the net zero emissions, and plastic and municipal solid waste will certainly play a role.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our panelists near and far for some great insights into this feedstock availability issue. There they all are on screen. We can see everybody there. So thanks so much, guys, for participating. Thank you for watching at home and asking some great questions. Let me just quickly tell you about the remaining two webinars in our series. On Friday at 10 o'clock, we'll be talking about ensuring social inclusiveness in this energy transition. And then on Monday at 10 o'clock, we'll be talking about what impact renewable liquid fuels will have on urban air quality. So go ahead and put those in your calendar now. In the meantime, you can check out Fuels Europe's YouTube channel to watch any of the webinars which have already taken place. So thanks for spending your morning with us, and I wish you all a great afternoon.